Hey guys, Trail Chasers here. Today I want to talk about something that I've been meaning to go over for a while, and that's the debate between carbon versus aluminum in mountain bikes. Anyways, I've owned a carbon Kona operator, I've ridden plenty of carbon bikes from Da Vinci Troyes, Felt Decrees, Pivot Firebirds, to aluminum bikes such as my common Salmida AMV3, my Diamondback Hook, my Option. I've had tons of aluminum bikes. I've ridden tons, like the Gorilla Gravity Mega Trail, Diamondback Mission Pro. So I've had a good chance to ride around on them and see how they feel. Anyways, I just got back from a 3-day trip at Whistler, and for that trip I rode my Kona operator, which is a carbon front triangle, aluminum rear. And I've always ridden my common Salmida AMV3, which is a aluminum bike, and I've enjoyed both of them, quite frankly, a ton. And to be honest with you, in the whole carbon versus aluminum debate, I don't really think there's any performance gains that you get from a carbon frame, as far as downhill is concerned. I feel if you're doing downhill, aluminum or carbon isn't necessarily a huge issue. Yes, it does add some stiffness, but it's really not that noticeable, especially considering wheels are where you're going to see most of your stiffness gains. That's where I think carbon does have a big advantage, is in the wheel game. You'll never really get an alloy wheel that's going to be as stiff as a carbon wheel unless it's super, super heavy. Although, there is something to be said for that. Some of the aluminum wheels are a lot nicer to have for all-day rides or longer rides. I've noticed from carbon wheels, depending on what brand, some are very, very rough against you. I had a chance to demo a set of Envy wheels for a week, and I do not like Envy wheels. I think they are way too stiff for my personal riding style, and there's a lot of harshness within those wheels. They're very precise, they roll excellent, they accelerate amazing, but they are very, very harsh. Now, the next thing that I hear talking about a lot is carbon is a lighter material. It is, and that is great. It's really helpful on trail bikes and cross-country bikes. I think carbon makes great sense for those bikes because the weight does help. However, the weight does not make much sense on a downhill bike, and a lot of people actually do prefer a heavier feeling downhill bike. If we look recently back to Nikolai, their downhill team, were actually adding weights to their mountain bikes at the Downhill World Cup to get them feel a little bit better in the rough stuff. It makes sense to have carbon in a lot of trail bikes, like I said, because it makes them pedal better, but also, like I said, you'll see more gains in carbon wheels for that because there is less rotational mass. Rotational mass will have a much bigger effect on your bike's overall handling than, say, a carbon or aluminum frame will. Aside from that, I think another area where carbon actually has a really big advantage is in the handlebar department. And this is kind of a dual-edged sword because, again, you can get too stiff and harsh. I think a 35mm carbon bar is a little bit too much in my opinion, and it adds to a lot of harshness, even though carbon does have very good vibration dampening qualities. The other thing is aluminum does not absorb vibrations as well as carbon. Now, there are some bars out there, like what I run, which is a Spank VibraCore bar. It's an aluminum bar with foam inside of it that helps to eliminate vibrations like carbon. It's heavier than carbon, it's not as stiff as carbon. I don't really notice a huge difference in stiffness, that's why I stuck with a 31.8mm clamp standard. I think it's just fine. I've never been like, man, my handlebars are super flexy. I just thought the 35 was another kind of useless standard, such as Boost was in a way. I don't think Boost is useless, but I don't really think it helps that much with 27.5 wheels. Anyways, back to topic. Carbon, yes, it is lighter, and it is definitely a lot more rigid. 31.8 carbon bars, I've actually found some to be very good. Raceface 6Cs are actually one that I would consider in a 35 width because they do have really good vibration dampening qualities. They're not super harsh. Envy bars, another super harsh bar. I do not like, to be honest, I'm not a huge fan of anything that Envy makes. I think it's all really too harsh. And that mainly just come down to my riding style, probably. Envy's really good for a lot more aggressive riders. I'm more of a passive rider when I ride, and I'm not clocking up speeds like the downhill pros, so for me, I don't really see huge gains from Envy composites. Anyways, one of the last things I want to go over is strength. Now, the thing with aluminum is if you hit a tree and you look at your bike and there might be a little ding or dent in it, you're usually good to go. Aluminum can break just like carbon does. Aluminum's not some God-sent bulletproof material like a lot of the internet would have you believe. To be perfectly honest, aluminum and carbon are both very strong and durable options at this point in time. I don't think durability needs to be a huge concern when purchasing a modern carbon bike. Now, that is not to say that carbon needs to be watched over more. I think if you have a crash or you just need to you need to put more frame protection onto carbon frames, which can actually add to the weight and make it weigh a little bit more than an aluminum frame, which is kind of funny. Now, there's also certain companies use thicker carbons. I know Da Vinci's, my friend Scott's Troy is a very heavy carbon bike, but it is pretty much bomb-proof. And I've heard he had a Norco before at a site, and the Norcos are always usually a fairly light carbon buildup, and he broke 2 of those frames, I believe. Don't quote me on that, but there is something that comes down to the manufacturer when it comes to carbon and based on how durable it is. Now, the other thing that I think about when I think of carbon is it does not take a direct impact like a rock hitting it or hitting it into a tree as well as aluminum would. With carbon, it may hit it and look fine, but you could actually have little micro fractures that you can't see within the frame, so that's always something to be very wary of when purchasing a used carbon bike or after you've just had a crash on your carbon bike. And if we look at recent trends in the kind of Enduro World Series racing, you can see a lot of people do spring for aluminum wheels with carbon frames. That's kind of because in Enduro World Series you need a bike that's going to last. So the fact that they trust carbon frames, it shows you that they are quite durable. And to be honest, if you break a carbon frame, you're probably going to have some more medical issues to worry about than that. So in conclusion, I kind of think that durability isn't an issue with carbon frames. The performance gains are really more in the weight side for trail and cross-country use. I think when it comes down to a downhill bike, I don't really have a preference between carbon and aluminum. I think they both ride phenomenal. I don't think there's a huge difference in performance between carbon and aluminum. And to be honest, if I had to choose a next downhill bike, I'd probably go with an aluminum frame because they do get beaten on and tossed around a little bit more than most bikes do. So I'd want something that I can pick up and not have to worry about tiny finite cracks developing in it. If I had to choose another trail bike, I think I'd actually go carbon, mainly because of the lightweight frame, and it's just a better choice for a trail bike. I think it makes a lot of sense. And the other thing I don't get into is carbon allows for better frame layups to where they can put stiffness where they need it, and they can remove material from there if they don't to make it a little bit lighter. And it also allows a lot more wiggle room as far as tubing is concerned. Hydroforming is great and you can get good shapes out of aluminum, but it's still nowhere near the sophistication of a carbon layup. Now, there's a reason carbon's more expensive to lay up because you have to make the molds, but once they do, they can crank out frame after frame after frame and know it's going to be exactly the same. With aluminum, there's always going to be a little bit of difference within the welds, and the frame might not match up perfectly. So that's one thing to take into account with aluminum versus carbon. Is carbon, you're basically going to get a one-to-one copy every time, but with aluminum, you may have some slight differences based on how it was welded. So overall, I think they're both great frame options. I think if I had to choose between a lower-end carbon bike or a higher-end aluminum bike, I would go with a higher-end aluminum bike because the aluminum versus carbon frame difference I don't think is huge, and I would much rather have the upgraded componentry in areas like tires, brakes, suspension, drivetrain, maybe a dropper post on there where the carbon one wouldn't. So all in all, I think if you had to choose between, say, spending $3,000 on a lower-end carbon bike or a mid-ranged aluminum bike, I would go for the mid-ranged aluminum bike. Anyways, that's just my thoughts on this. If you guys enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe. It helps me get motivation to make more videos for you guys that watch my videos. Anyways, this has been Trail Chasers, and I'll catch you guys on the trails. Bye-bye. Woo!